Welcome to the Rabia and Sana show. We're two Desi girls reinventing cultural norms with love to make difficult conversations easier to help you take courageous steps faster.
Whether you feel like a misfit now or have been breaking the standards, this podcast is for you, for the adults, the young. Come as you be and become your authentic self as you desire. Let's go reinvent some cultural norms together.
Hello everyone, I am Rabia Paracha. I have been a rebel without a cause for most of my life until I discovered my purpose to empower women to empower themselves. And that led me down a rabbit hole to become a life coach from CTI Coactive Coaching. And today I'm a mind and life power coach who helps people break free of their limiting cultural beliefs to find the life they love and the love of their life.
Hello everyone, I am Sana. I am from New Jersey, a Pakistani American. Professionally, I work in the clinical research field. And personally, I have always had this purpose of empowering women of South Asian culture to be able to live the life that they want to live and be true to themselves instead of what the culture expects them to be. And so here I am pursuing that purpose, and I am also studying to become a life coach. Let's get started.
Hello everyone, welcome again to the Rabia and Sana show. And today we are excited to have Dr. Sujata Ives with us.
Dr. Sujata was born in Pune, India, and she was in elementary school when her parents brought her to the US. She's balanced the norms of two vastly different cultures, and she's developed a passion to help people find their purpose and passion for work and life. Dr. Sujata has a PhD in Educational Cognitive Psychology, and she's breaking barriers through brain science. She's a researcher, publisher of professional articles, and an inspiring speaker. Dr. Sujata is working on a book called Activate Success, which is going to be out later this year. I can't wait for it and cannot wait to get started on this conversation.
I know. And so thank you so much, Dr. Sujata, for being here with us today. I am so thrilled to have you, a friend and someone I admire very much. And I'm so excited that we are going to be talking about culturally responsive relationships and how it pertains to all of us. So I'm really excited to get into this conversation. And, you are just an amazing person, and I can't wait for our audience to hear you. Where would you like to begin?
Thank you so much, Rabia, Sana. It's just such an honor to be here today on this beautiful spring day. The cherry blossom trees are out, and so we should too, right? So I want you to know that the journey was not linear, that it was definitely a sine curve too. My work also includes the presidency for the Maryland Career Development Association. I am the associate chair for the International Committee for the American Counseling Association, and also the leadership support liaison for the Global Connections Committee of the National Career Development Association, and my work as community coordinator for the World Council on Intercultural and Global Competency affords me the opportunities to work with 7 regions of this globe. I am definitely a diversity and innovation driven workplace development leader. I enjoy my work as an employment psychologist and career counselor, and I especially love working with my clients in creating work and life designs, because life affects work and work affects life. So to be an interculturalism activator, a diversity activator, through my research and national and international presentations and authoring has been such a wonderful experience and gift in gathering people of influence to leverage their global strengths and building culturally responsive relationships through sustainable goals. So I thank you so much for this opportunity for this podcast.
It's our pleasure. It's actually our honor and privilege that you're here with us to share all the great things that you're doing. And my goodness, you've got a huge entourage of qualifications. I can't wait to hear about culturally responsive relationships. Before we dig deep into this conversation, I would love to hear a little bit about your story and what led you to this path. Could you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you so much. Like Sana said, I was born in Pune in India. And actually, I was born on Easter Sunday morning. And today is Easter Sunday. So that was the day that my parents decided to apply for a visa to come to the United States. And for 7 years, they were denied. And on the 8th year was their lucky year. And so when I was 8 years old, we came here for opportunity and freedom. I think my father just knew that they, at that time, would not be open for me. Now, one of the reasons, and it's very obvious here, so I have to disclose, and I have to be honest with the listening audience, is that I have a condition that I was born with where my vocal cords don't close. And it's a genetic marker. It's called essential tremor. And so my vocal cords come really close, but they don't touch. And so I speak with a little bit of wiggle, a little bit of jiggle. So you can imagine. And I want to ask the audience, have you ever lost your voice? It's kind of irritating, isn't it? It can be annoying. You just want to get it back to normal. So you do a few things. Maybe you take cough drops, maybe you gargle with salt water, and eventually it goes back to normal. But mine does not. And so being self-aware and having honed those senses, it's really worked for me in that I learned to become a very good listener because I was shy to speak. But coming here to the United States, my teachers were telling me to speak more. And the cultural difference was that my parents were asking me to speak less. And so the integration and assimilation process had to happen. I needed to fit in. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to make friends. You know, all of that good stuff that happens in early childhood. And there was no ESL back then. I had to learn English. And so my teacher would say to me, go home and watch a lot of TV. Well, you wouldn't hear that nowadays. Teachers, educators want students to go away from television. But back then, the teacher said, go home and watch a lot of TV. So I went home and I watched a lot of I Love Lucy. And so I learned how to speak English from Lucy. Thank goodness, not from Ricky, but, that's how I watched and learned and eventually was able to do my homework in a language that I could barely exchange greetings in because that was the expectation.
And so that's quite a remarkable story because I love Lucy too. I grew up on it as well. So I know what you mean about Ricky. And that's quite a story, quite a journey into the diversity between the two cultures, where our South Asian culture, we're asked to be quiet if there's something unusual or different. And in the Western culture, when you're here, they're like, oh, share it, talk more, expose it. And so that's a just over blanketing difference between the South Asian culture and the Western culture, where it's a lot more accepting or allowing ourselves to be who we are versus hiding that part of us. So no shame, no guilt. I think you had amazing teachers as well. I'm not sure if every teacher would have done that either. So I think you definitely lucked out having that foundation early on. Someone say that to you. So I think that's just beautiful. And I know there's a lot more to your story as well. And so I'm excited to hear that as we go. Dr. Sujata, just as a starting point for this conversation, I would just love for you to tell us, what is interculturalism and the avenues that it sort of leads to?
Yes. So interculturalism is the next, it's DEI 2.0. So this is the next step in acceptance. And interculturalism specifically alludes to having dialogues and conversations through storytelling. Now, a long time ago in college, we started off with ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism was a very popular word that meant I'm over here and you're over there, and I understand that you are different than me. And that was a really good place to start, because we have to start somewhere, and we can physically see that people are different than us, the way that they dress and so forth. So ethnocentrism eventually led into multiculturalism, which is, now that I know that you're different, let's find out what makes you different. And so multiculturalism led to, oh my goodness, a plethora of research and books and lectures on the differences and what those differences mean. And so now we want to move that from ethnocentrism, multiculturalism, to interculturalism, where we are actually listening to stories that people have to tell us from their perspectives and from their culture. Now, United Nations has a sector called UNESCO, and it is UNESCO that is bringing us a storytelling model. They are carrying the banner for listening to the stories that different cultures can bring us. In the storytelling model, people can go to UNESCO.org, they can go to UnitedNations.org, and in addition to the sustainable goals, they're asking to actively listen to the story that people have to tell. And, each one of us has a story to tell. So there's so much to learn through stories.
That's amazing. And, as you're speaking to us about this journey of diversity and inclusion, from what I'm hearing from you is that originally it was more about what made us different and trying to understand it, but also now is how do we integrate that, and also how do we see the similarities as well.
That's exactly right, Rabia. And, learning this, if I go backwards in my own life, I can see the progression of ethnocentrism to multiculturalism to interculturalism, because, I was not allowed to date, but I was allowed to bring home male friends that I had high school projects, science projects, and so forth. So, my parents valued education, so it was allowed. And I remember my senior year of high school, I brought a group of kids. We were working on a physics project together. And one of the boys, he walked into the house and he said, your house smells funny. So I said, what do you mean it smells funny? And so he's like, I'm not used to this. Can we open a window? And of course, yes, I opened up a window, but it was my mother cooking curry. And I wasn't upset with him or anything. I understood that this cultural piece was different for him and that he had never been in an Indian home before. So the curry was definitely a different experience for him. So if you fast forward then to college, it was college that I could feel the multiculturalism because it was embedded in different courses and course requirements. And then after college, I met my husband, and I definitely knew and I could feel this intercultural aspect because he was so curious about my stories and, just embraced the Indian culture and loves Indian food and all that kind of stuff. So looking back in my journey, I could see these definitions formulating and evolving.
Wow. Dr. Sujata, I did not know about this definition of interculturalism. So thank you for that. It really does make sense when you think about it. But growing up in the US also, coming from Pakistan and being a different culture at home and then having a different culture in school, I would think when I would see my friends who are of different culture that I don't feel comfortable sharing my story with them because I would think that they don't understand, and a lot of the times they don't, we don't question each other to learn and to understand the stories. And so we, growing up, I sort of just kept that part of my life separate than the part that I would face in, the school culture and keep my ethnic culture at home only. So how do you think that we begin to do this dialogue with each other?
Yes, absolutely. We're always going to have the haters. The haters are always going to be there. And that behavior comes out of fear and anxiety. And so many of those behaviors in society are just fear-based behaviors. But you know what? We don't focus on that. They're going to do what they're going to do. What we do is we focus on the positive. We do, have, right? It's not the other way around. We don't have, do, be. So we be the change that we wish to see in this world, just like Mahatma Gandhi said. We gravitate towards like-minded, like-hearted people. And of all organizations, the United Nations has been there for decades, and they have put forth the Sustainable Development Goals. And those 17 goals are highly embracing. They're embracing of everyone, but they don't make cultural distinctions. Instead, they give you 17 passions. So what I'm saying to you today is you find people that are passionate about a cause. So for me, it's interculturalism. It's about diversity. It's about bringing people together. It's about creating future leaders. So those are the goals that I would choose from those sustainable development goals. You find those groups where you think the same, where your heart space is the same, and you will feel it also in your gut brain. Your gut space, your gut brain will also tell you which path to take, which path not to take. So, oh gosh, we're not worried about those haters. They're always going to be there. The negativity is always going to be there. We're going to focus on the positive, and we're going to keep it moving forward. We're going to share our stories, whether our stories are verbally through podcasts such as this, or through music, or through food. Yes.
And that opens up a lot of more questions for me. So yes, we're not going to be limited or be shut down by the haters, definitely. How do we interact? Like, there will come a point of interaction. What would you say when that situation comes
Mhm.
crosses my path, what would you say is the best thing to approach the haters with?
So in psychology, we have a joke, but this joke is so relevant to this conversation, and it goes like this. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is 0, because the light bulb has to want to be changed. You see, the person has to want to be changed. If the person approaches you not for acceptance and understanding, but for argument, and if you argue back, that creates 2 fools. So we must choose through our actions, through our deeds. We cannot change the person's mind. That person has to want to be changed. And here's the thing, though. That person, those people, whether it's an individual or a group, why is this happening to me? Again, you see, so those lessons keep coming back until that person then eventually goes from the fixed mindset, which is back here in the limbic system, to the frontal lobe, which is the growth mindset. And thank goodness, in my estimation, it's just my viewpoint of this world, I think that we have many, many more growth-minded people versus the fixed-minded people, because, life is not happy for them. So they don't know how to radiate happiness for us. They don't know how to accept. But the change is going on all around them. They just choose not to accept that change. If you look around North America, Canada, Mexico, North American continent is filled with diversity. It's a melting pot. It's a beautiful kale salad with lots of colors and lots of flavors and aromas and such. And it just makes you such a better person if you do accept differences. Now, this conversation can also very easily bring us into neurodiversity. There are so many diversities, not only cultural, but neurodiversities. And we are accepting autism. We have strategies, we have groups where that is their passion and they're working towards acceptance. Elon Musk did a beautiful stand-up message on Saturday Night Live last year, and he fully admitted that he had a neurodiversity, and he was a little different growing up, but he didn't let that stop him. And I think that you see this K through 12. I think that the special education sector, the neurodiversity sector, are putting things in place for acceptance. And we need to do the same thing K through 12. We need to have diversity education. We must have life skill education so children do not use violence as an option. Why are you waiting till college to teach diversity and multiculturalism? We must, K through 12, it starts early. We must teach kids the philosophy of passive resistance, non-violence, from Mahatma Gandhi and MLK. Martin Luther King, that was his philosophy. We're not going to bring up swords or guns or anything. We are going to act peacefully to get justice.
That's really interesting, Dr. Sujata. What I'm thinking is some of the challenges that, I faced growing up here. Our culture, the Desi South Asian culture, kind of encourages us to not forget our culture. When we come in another country and we sort of start to learn new practices and things like that, my family really encouraged us to to not let go of that part of our culture, the Desi culture, to keep on practicing. And it was like, if we try to learn about other cultures or try to take on the practices and the customs, it was sort of looked bad. And so did you face any of that? And throughout your journey, do you see that from our Desi community or your home culture? Do you see that as a challenge in your entire journey?
Yes, absolutely. So true. And be under a glass dome. We are going to school. We are exposed to the North American culture. We are going to have certain freedoms that they did not have. And so having this conversation with parents and with children is so very important, because the communication of what is best for the person, is it best for the children to adhere 100% to those old traditions, or is there some compromise here that can be made because of the educational freedoms, the religious freedoms, and so forth? And I think that those ground rules at home really need to be communicated. Everybody needs to sit down and talk about these things. And so, just to give you an example from my own life, I could hear my parents holding on to those traditions. And the way that my mother described it was this. She said, "I don't want you to prevent me from my role as an Indian mother." So she viewed her role as an Indian mother to, number one, choose my mate. And she viewed that as her right and her privilege. So when I came home from college, a different person, a liberated woman, watching her friends date, watching her friends marry for love, it was something that I wanted for myself. I just knew that I could not marry through an arranged marriage. I just knew that I couldn't. And the family tried to dissuade me. They did a pretty good job, or they tried to do a pretty good job. My aunt, she came forward and she even was kind of mean. She said, "Well, with your vocal cord condition, who's going to accept you? Who's going to take you?" So as if the perspective was, you marry so that you can be taken care of. And again, that was a cultural difference, because here through college, my professors were saying, "Speak more. You are important." They were empowering me. They were creating an independent Indian woman. Then I would go home and I would hear these kind of scripts from my mother, my aunt, and so forth. So one day I just sat them down and I said, "We have to communicate. I enjoy the food. I will keep this food going. The tradition of cooking, the traditional food, curry, biryani, samosas, all of those delicious foods, I will keep that going. The sari, I will wear that on auspicious occasions. However, I have found very good friends in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Erikson's stages of development, and Bronfenbrenner, his ecological systems theory, where we are influenced by our circles. And I said, through those books, my best friends, I've come to understand that it is about awareness, intention, and compromise. So either with or without your blessing, I am going to choose for love, please. And they simply could not accept it. And I simply could not accept them being adamant. So I did marry for love. They did not accept me, and I was disowned. The children came. I did send pictures lectures and so forth, my father kept peace in the family. He completely understood that, look, if I took Sujata to China, she would probably marry a Chinese man, understand and speak Chinese fluently. It just so happens that I brought her to North America. So he fully went from fixed mindset to growth mindset. He understood that he'd taken somebody from a different culture, placed her in a different culture, and of course it's going to have an influence. But my mother, my aunties, they just could not accept this at all whatsoever. So I was very grateful, at least, that my father, when he was alive, he did accept, and he did come to see my children once or twice. He did come. But I created a life for myself. And this addresses the second part of the questioning today, which is self-leading behavior. You must learn to self-lead before you lead others. You see, when we come to the table, it is not one person. It is not one entity. You are 5 things in one, 5 constructs. You are bringing to the table the biology of you, the psychology of you, the social of you, the culture of you, and the spirit of you. So when you are speaking to one other person, that's 5 plus 5. That's 10 constructs at the table. It is a complex thing. Culturally responsive relationships is a very complex thing. So understand, if you have 10 constructs at that table, there is a balance. It requires understanding and active listening. Just as Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. And so many times we don't do that, and it's because of fear. And I completely understood my parents' behavior was fearful. They didn't want to lose the culture. But my father eventually understood this is a balance between 2 cultures. It's a balance between work and life, between Indian and American cultures.
For sure. And, you opened up so many different thoughts right now. I would love to know a little bit about your experience of being disowned, having your father being accepting, and then he passes. And so your relationship with your family, how did it impact your life personally? How did that impact you?
Yes, one of the very sad things is I didn't have a chance to grow up with my cousins. And even though my aunts and uncles did keep in touch with me after my parents disowned me, this is a very funny thing too, very silly thing. They said, well, you're our niece. You're exactly not our daughter. We would have disowned our daughter too, but you're our niece. So we're not going to disown you because you're our niece. So I just felt that was such an interesting thing to say too. And I, of course, was very appreciative, but it was always long distance. So, and back then we didn't have cell phones or anything. So, having those phone calls on the land line, and it was so expensive and so forth. And it was expensive to make trips to India too, of which my parents did not make any trips back then. My father said, we're here in the United States, we're American citizens, and that comes first. So they were not bound really to India all that much either, that they understood giving back to the United States what the States had done for us and all the wonderful freedoms that we had enjoyed here. But so now as an adult with WhatsApp and social media and so forth, LinkedIn and Zoom, I'm able to reconnect with my cousins. And I'm so grateful for that. and just catching up on those stories and how I felt and how they felt and so forth has just been so wonderful to just reconnect as adults.
I have a second part to this question as well. And the second part is you were talking about self-leading behaviors and responsive parents and responsible parents. So combining these two, when, it's natural to have a very limited mindset. You only know one thing and you bring that one thing with you to a different place. We call it North America, our new home. And so we brought this limited mindset into this environment that's very open and almost totally opposite to what we believe. And so as a responsive parent and as self-leading as well, like combining these attributes, what are some tips that you could provide us with as a parent listening to this podcast, as someone who's new in the country or someone who's been here a long time but hasn't yet integrated? And just one more piece, you use the term melting pot. It's a very interesting word because melting pot means you fit in, you become one. And in Canada, where I am, it's the emphasis is maintaining your identity in that multicultural where you've come from. So these two words sometimes for me are contradicting because melting pot is you become one of them, and multiculturalism, which is highly emphasized in Canada, is you maintain your identity and you find acceptance as well. So I just want these two words, how they are the same perhaps, and I am not understanding it properly. So I would like to ask that question.
Yes. And so this starts the notion of culturally responsive parenting. The parents who bring us here from different cultures expecting to parent the way that their parents parented them. And it was in college, really, postgraduate work, where I truly understood that when I was a child, I put my parents on a pedestal, as we all do. But eventually, you come to the realization that they are people just like we are. And more than that, you go a step further and realize that it's wounded people that raise wounded people. So they are not perfect in their own right. So we have research that identifies similarities in parenting in different regions, in different cultures, to promote the socialization of children, the readiness for school, the readiness for work, and for life. But the research also shows that regardless of the country of origin, or socioeconomic status or culture, the primary response of parenting and attachment proves to be one of the most important factors. So to have and create an environment for the child that is loving and accepting, which means that parents are not treating each child the same. You see, parents will take great delight in saying, I treat my children all the same. And I want to make this distinction. Do not treat your children the same. You can be fair, which is a very different thing than the same. You cannot treat the children the same because they all have different personalities. Some are going to require authoritative, very strict parenting. And some of your children, you can be a little bit more permissive. Now, if you want to treat them all fair, if it's fairness that you're talking about, then yes, I agree with that. Treat them all fairly. Okay, so I wanted to make that important distinction. Parents are, let's face it, parents or grandparents, the caregivers, for this conversation, we'll just say parents. Parents are the child's very first teachers, the very first nurturing relationship, right? That supports optimal social development as well as brain development. Very important for children to develop in a nurturing environment that has loving relationships. Very important. And so the notion of attachment through these loving relationships, because very important, the infant needs attachment in early and middle childhood. The child needs attachment, but later in adolescence, there seems to be kind of a shift from this attachment to independence, as Erik Erikson will say in his research. And that is the very time that parents need those parenting lessons, because instead of being reactive, they really need to be responsive, supportive, and positive towards their adolescents. So, these cultural norms that parents push and emphasize on the children, regardless of the North American setting, they're in a different setting. So what they're afraid of is they're afraid of losing values. And it's important to have the conversations of, Mom, Dad, I'm keeping the values. I'm not going rogue here, keeping those values that are dear to you. But I am in a different setting. I am showing you the respect. I'm not being disrespectful, but I do have my own beliefs and my own self-leading values, which I can feel in my gut brain what's good for me. I know that you know, or you feel that you know best for me, and I appreciate you for that. But I too feel that I know what's best for me. So can we come on some culturally universal agreement about value and how we can fight and argue? How do we do that in this household? Is it reactiveness? Is it through responsiveness? So through this interaction, what does this interaction look like? What does this relationship look like so that your needs are met and also my needs are met too? Just like Maslow says, we all have physiological and psychological needs that must be met.
Right. You make it sound so easy. That was just so beautifully said. Communication, not treating your children the same, communicating and knowing how to be responsive versus reactive, I think boils down to communication. What are your thoughts on
I mean, that was really beautiful, Dr. Sujata. That really, really makes me understand as well, as a parent. Outside of parenting-child relationship, what about in culture as a whole? What about all of us communicating with each other and all of us as a society? Because we will still be, have that gap, even if we talk within our families with each other and other relationships besides kids and parents, other relationships that we have, siblings, all of us as a community coming together and having this communication.
Yes, it's such an important point. We, first and foremost, you must be willing to learn from each other. We have to be open not only to cultures, but also there's the age learning, right? This respect of the Generation Z, millennials, and baby boomers, or the silent generation too. So there are some significant experiences that the older generations have been through, those generations, but we must be open to learn from each other. And when we do engage in relationships, let's look for shared value. Let's show respect that way instead of the differences. Let's see, what do we have in common, besides the food or besides the style of dress? Is it wisdom? Is it integrity? Is it achievements, right? Is it responsibilities or competencies? What do we have? And talk about the values that way. Show your trustworthiness, minimize the politics in a family, minimize the politics in the workplace by not gossiping. My minister he puts it this way in church. He says, if you want to come into my office and talk about somebody else, please know that I'm going to go to that somebody else and tell them what you say. And he has minimized the gossip in church, I think, tenfold, 50-fold, because people actually sit there in the congregation and they start looking at each other and the people sitting next to them. But sometimes that's what it takes, to stop the gossip and the politics and so forth. So, communicate the change that you want, communicate that you're loyal to your culture, but you're also loyal to yourself. See, it's about, I'm going to introduce you to this word here, perspicacity. Perspicacity is that thing that you have up here in the frontal lobe where you and only you can discern what fits and what is good for your life, for you, yourself, me, myself, and I alone. It's just something that comes from within. It comes from your head brain, your heart brain, your gut brain. And you have to search for that perspicacity. You have to listen to it. Sometimes it comes in the dead of night. Sometimes it comes in the dawn of the mornings, when you are mindful and silent. And in that silence, you gain that perspicacity. It's your capacity.
That's a beautiful word. It's the first time I'm hearing it, to be honest with you. Perspicacity. And when you were speaking about it, it connected so many dots that nobody understands. Nobody gets what I'm feeling. I'm not going to have support from others, be it within my culture or outside. This is something only I can understand. And it's clarity. I'm hearing within yourself. It's clarity for me to be able to act with confidence, know that there is no harm intended in my actions, that I'm not going against someone. I had an experience, and without going into the details, it was with my mother. And I was going towards a decision that she didn't like. And she said, this doesn't make me happy. And I said, Mom, I'm not doing this to make you unhappy. This makes me happy. And so I didn't know where that was coming from. But I think that what you just described perfectly for me, that's where my resonance was towards that one experience, that we do a lot of things not to make people feel disrespected, but it's self-respect. So that distinction is, we're not doing it against someone that is taken personally, but we're doing it for ourselves, to respect ourselves. And when we show up with respect for ourselves, of course, we're going to offer respect to others. But if we don't have that for ourselves, how can we offer it to anyone? And I think a big conversation around what we're talking about today is respect.
Yes, right. So right, Rabia. I mean, you can go shopping with your mother, try on different dresses, and she'll say to you, choose this one. This one looks perfect on you. But if it doesn't feel right on your own body, your hips, your legs, if it doesn't feel right for you, you're not going to purchase that dress.
I think this conversation is actually going into that other topic that we wanted to talk about today, individualism in a group. And that, I think we've touched on it, but, could you tell us more about what that looks like?
Yes. So Maslow, I keep going back to Maslow because it's my favorite theory of all time. So Maslow says, and of course, physiological needs must be met first. That's a given: food, water, clothing, shelter. But then you have psychological needs that also need to be met. And that is a sense of belongingness. That belongingness comes from the culture that we feel comfortable with. We were raised in a particular culture, and make no bones about it, even though you, as the listening audience, are a fifth or sixth generation from the Mayflower, white wasp American, like my husband is, make no bones about it, each family has a culture of their own. Culture means the way that they do things, the norms, what's accepted behavior, the traditions during holidays, the cooking, the dishes, the foods, the style of dress, the manner in which they carry themselves. So when of course, today we're talking about diversity and cultures because we all come from different cultures. But,
thank you for listening.
really,
We hope you enjoyed
truthfully,
today's episode.
everyone is coming
Please
from a
rate,
different
subscribe, and
culture.
review wherever you
Because
listen
you
to
can
podcasts.
see this.
Follow the
There's
Rabia and Sana Show
50%
on social
divorce
media.
in North
Remember,
America.
you can
There
watch
are
the
two
video
cultures
version on
that are
YouTube,
colliding.
and don't forget to
It's
share,
two
like, and subscribe.
distinct
If you
ways
want
of
life
doing
coaching
things
services,
that
or you
need
are
to be
reinventing cultural
communicated
norms for
and
yourself and
compromised
think you would be a
upon.
great
So
guest
is
and
it
want
that
to be on our
only
show,
different cultures
please
are having
email
divorce? No,
contact@rabiaandsana.com
Americans are also divorcing because of
And be
the
sure
difference
to
in
check out our
family
next
cultures
episode.
that are
See you next time.
there.
See you
So,
next time.
Robbie, could you please repeat your question, because now I went this way. So please repeat it. Thank you.
You're answering the question, actually. How does individualism in a group show up?
Yes, thank you for. And so, how do you become an individual when there are okay, well, if you're in society, you have to follow cultural norms. You have to stop at the red light. You go when it turns green. You work 9 to 5. There are certain norms. But how do you not lose your individuality? And that's where the embracement of perspectives and cultures comes in. People in the workplace are always saying, think outside the box. Okay, well, you're outside the box now, but you're not accepting different cultures. That doesn't make any sense, So thinking outside the box, yes, embrace your individualism, bring you to the table, bring your perspectives to the table, And as Maslow said, the top of it, after sense of belongingness, after self-esteem, is your self-actualization. See, the two most important days in your life are the day that you were born and the day that you figure out why. It is all about purpose. So you join a company because you want the 401k, you want longevity, you need the health. I forget the word. What is it? The healthcare, all of that stuff. But you also join an organization for your passion, for your purpose. So you're bringing that individuality and going back to the sustainable development goals of no poverty, clean air, functional cities, so forth. Whatever your passion is, you must follow your passion in life, because that is what's going to make you self-actualize. Your parents might, like my parents did, they wanted me to be a medical doctor, but my talent or interest was not there. They could easily have wanted me to, let's say, be a basketball player, but I'm short. My physical stature doesn't lend to being a basketball player, and my interest doesn't lend there either. So sometimes you can't really fulfill somebody else's wishes for life, and many times you have to fulfill your wish for life. What talents do you have? What skills do you have? Then you build on that and you find your passion. And like we're doing here, talking about what we're passionate about, it just absolutely just resonates, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sure does.
Dr. Sujata, I'm hearing from you so many tools and tips that you are, giving us on how to sort of maintain your own identity in a different culture and still feel like you're accepted. So I heard communication within not just family, but communication with each other in groups. And I think what you said about every family has their own culture, like that's so beautiful and that's so right. We that's our individualism as a family and as a person, is what our unique culture is. And then you said about values. So really what they're trying to do is keep those values. And by saying don't do anything other than, what our culture has brought us. But our Desi culture, not doing things differently is a norm in our Desi culture. Like that's one of the taboos, that if you do something different, it's considered, you're considered an outcast. So I just want to know, from my personal journey, how did you deal with that feeling of being an outcast? Was that one of the reasons how you got so involved in this interculturalism journey of yours? And how did you deal with that feeling of, being put aside?
Yeah, such a great question. You guys are so good in your questions. Really amazing. I was so hurt and so sad at the beginning, because it was right after the honeymoon that my mother made the phone call and said, "We cannot accept this marriage," and in her beautiful Indian accent and so forth. And I immediately started crying. I was young. I was hormonal. I was, we just don't know how to respond to these things. And so I tried to convince her through my tears and so forth. And my husband was sitting there watching all of this. And after that conversation, he hugged me. And after I calmed down, he had a very cathartic talk with me. He said, "Sujata, we are husband and wife. We are the circle. If people do not wish to be part of our circle, that is their choice. You are hurt, you will miss them greatly, but it is their choice. So at some point, if they change their mind, our circle will be open to them." And that talk, through his wisdom and through his perspective, really gave me the courage to just move on. And we had said our vows just 2 weeks earlier, and they really meant something. And this was the test. This was the test. And so I knew that my love, my loyalty now was to him, with him, that they were no longer my inner circle. They were still family, but no longer my inner circle. And we created a family of our own. I have 2 beautiful daughters, and they're very good people. And we kept the line of communication open. We did not treat them the same. One needed more authoritative parenting, and the other one, we were much more permissive, because she was so hard on herself that we didn't need to be so hard on her. And so, the styles of parenting were very different. We treated them very differently, but yet when it came to fairness, we made sure that we were fair, we were impartial, and we were non-judgmental. We understood that they each had different skills and different talents, and we let them find their own. Whatever you choose, make sure that you choose wisely. Make sure that you find happiness in what you choose.
Wow. And, leading by example is what I'm hearing from you, that you're leading what you're speaking about, that you're so passionate about it. It's become a part of you. And I know that when we were speaking prior to the interview, that you said that when you discover your passion and purpose, that has a lot to do with that happiness. And you're no longer dependent on someone to behave a certain way, someone to do a certain thing to make you feel happy and fulfilled, that you find that from within. I can totally resonate and relate to that. I know what that feels like, that it doesn't matter anymore. It goes from I don't care to it doesn't matter anymore. And I think that I love you so much. And I always love your perspective and learning, because I've learned so much today. I don't think we hear this in everyday life. There's so many other thoughts that are coming up as a result of this talk that we're having today, and would love to have you back. It's been just amazing. So very happy and very grateful to you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Rabia. This is about women helping women. We must not be against each other. There is a book by Phyllis Chesler, Dr. Phyllis Chesler, that I recommend to every woman, and it's called Woman's Inhumanity to Woman. She delineates exactly what we are doing, thinking, and being to ourselves as women. We must encourage each other, empower each other. Everyone is fighting a battle, and you throw into the mix all of these cultural elements. It's not easy. It's not easy, but one of the tips, well, I have two last tips. One is to use I statements. Never approach somebody and say, you did this, you're making me do this, because they get very defensive. It's just much better to say, I feel blank when you do blank. So those I feel statements are very, very important. And the second tip that I have for you is timing. Timing is crucial, and it goes into emotional intelligence. Do not approach your parents or your significant other at the wrong time. Assess, have that situational awareness and approach the person when the person is open to receive something from you.
Amazing, Dr. Sujata. Those were some awesome tips. Like, I'm writing it down.
Thank you, Sana. It's just been an honor, it's just been a privilege, and I look forward to continuing this conversation as well. Like you said, Rabia, there's just so much to talk about. We can just keep going on and on, but we want to break the generational and cultural cycle. We don't want to be wounded people raising wounded people like has happened to us. We honestly, don't want to make it about us. We want to make it about our children and give them those loving, nurturing pieces that we didn't have. But along with the self-discipline, don't get me wrong, along with the self-discipline, discipline is very important.
Finding that balance in between, that place, that sweet spot that you don't ignore and avoid a lot of things within yourself, but also integrate with others through this place of healing, and having that balance and that knowingness that's the timing aspect so applying the tips within yourself and then acting from a place of balance and healing and not causing more damage, because ultimately that's what happens when we don't. And so lovely. So Dr. Sujata, where can our listeners want to reach out or connect with you? What would be the best way for them to do that?
Yes, the best way that you guys can find me is through LinkedIn, please. And message me and tell me that you heard the podcast. Link this podcast to your message so that I know where you heard me.
And is your LinkedIn your name?
They can just put in my name and find me that way, please.
Great. And Sana, what else would you like to add? Any closing thoughts from your side?
Yeah, just one closing thought is that this feeling of support that you are saying that we need to do for each other. And that's also a tip that I heard from you is support. That's what we need to be for each other. And that's what our podcast is all about, that, we want to be that support for our South Asian community, to tell them that it's okay to talk about these things, because growing up, this was a huge challenge for me. And it still is at a big level, to be accepted for who I am and do things that are different from our cultural norm. And, I think everything that you said today really kind of resonates, and it ties in with the purpose of this whole podcast.
And that was wonderful.
Looking forward to your book.
Could you tell us a little bit about that as well, if you'd like?
Yes. So since I'm an employment psychologist, going to different conferences and presenting at different conferences, I ran into a woman, and you probably know her. Her name is Sandra Hort, and she is a change specialist. She belongs to the Society for Change Management. And so the two of us started talking about, how can we make a positive change? And generationally speaking, that is what Generation Z and millennials focus on. That is their focus, is making a positive impact in this world. It's very important to them. And this stems from what they have experienced. They've experienced 9/11. They've experienced, George Floyd, all of these different things that have happened in history. Right now, they're experiencing a war between Russia and Ukraine. So all of these things really go into who they are. And so Activate Success is a book that we're both co-authoring.
Beautiful. And I can't wait to have that in the bookstore so that we can grab a copy, and we'll keep everyone posted as your journey comes along, and maybe have you back to discuss that whole phenomenon that you're talking about. I think it would be beautiful. It was wonderful, Dr. Sujata. Just amazing to have you. And
thanks.
And so we're two Desi girls
reinventing cultural norms
with love.
With love. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Please rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow the Rabia and Sana Show on social medias.
Remember, you can watch the video version on YouTube, and don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
If you want life coaching services, or you are reinventing cultural norms for yourself and think you would be a great guest and want to be on our show, please email contact@therabiaandsanashow.com.
And be sure to check out our next episode. See you next time.
See you next time.